Arizona Territory, 1879. The air was thick with heat and dust when Sheriff Lowell Foster heard the faintest sound of crying coming from the livery barn behind the jailhouse. He paused mid-step. It was nearing sundown, and the streets of Cora Flats were mostly quiet, the bulk of the town's folk already tucked inside or gathered at Myers' Saloon across the road. But the sound was too soft, too human to ignore. Lowell stepped through the barn's side door, boots crunching over dry straw. "Hello," he called, hand resting near his revolver. The crying stopped. He waited. Then it started again, muffled, desperate, coming from one of the back stalls. Lowell approached slowly, lantern raised. The beam caught on movement inside the far stall. Someone huddled in the corner, eyes wide, face streaked with dirt and dried blood. It was a woman. She flinched when he got close enough to see her clearly dark hair tangled at her shoulders, a split lip, wrists rubbed raw where they had been tied. The stall door was latched from the outside with a rusted chain. Lowell dropped to one knee. "It's all right, I'm not here to hurt you." She stared at him, her voice was hoarse. "Are you the sheriff?" "I am. Name's Lowell Foster." Her knees gave out and she sank into the straw. "Thank God." He unlooped the chain and eased the door open. She didn't move right away, just sat there trembling. Lowell took off his coat and offered it to her. "You're safe now." She pulled it around her shoulders. "My name is Delaney Lark." He helped her to her feet, steadying her with a hand beneath her elbow. "Who did this to you, Delaney?" She didn't answer at first. Her eyes darted toward the barn entrance like she expected someone to come back. Lowell made a decision then. "Come on. Let's get you out of here." He walked her across the street to the jailhouse, guiding her gently up the steps. Inside, he settled her on the cot in the back office, poured her a glass of water, and waited. Delaney sipped it slowly, then looked up at him. "I was traveling with my uncle. We came down from New Mexico looking for work, but he sold me." Lowell's jaw clenched. "Sold you to a man named Sutter, said I'd work in his kitchen, but it wasn't the kitchen he meant." Lowell felt something burn in his chest. "You tried to run." "I did run," she whispered. "Last night. They caught me before I got past the corral. Sutter locked me in that stall, said I'd learn my place." He stood up. "You will not be going back there." "But I have no one," she said quietly. "No money, nowhere to go." "You have me," Lowell said without thinking, "and I know this town. Sutter won't lay a hand on you again." He posted a deputy to the jailhouse overnight and made Delaney a bed in the back room of the Mercantile, where the owner's wife agreed to sit with her. Then he rode out to Sutter's ranch under moonlight, knocked the man out cold, and brought him back in irons. By morning, word had spread. The girls working above the saloon nodded at Delaney when she passed. Old Mrs. Cray from the bakery pressed a roll into her hand. But still, the town watched her like a stray dog that might bite, Lowell noticed. And so did Delaney. That afternoon, she sat on the edge of the porch outside the jailhouse, arms wrapped tight around herself. Lowell leaned on the post beside her. "I can leave," she said quietly. "I know folks do not want me here." "I do," he said. She blinked up at him. "I want you here." Delaney looked away and her voice was small. "Why?" "Because I saw you locked in that stall, because no one deserves to be treated like that, and because you are strong enough to have survived it." Her mouth trembled. "You do not even know me." "I would like to," he said. She looked up at him then, really looked. "What if I am not someone worth knowing?" Lowell crouched in front of her. "You are." Her hand brushed his by accident, but she did not pull it away. The next days passed quietly. Delaney took work helping Mrs. Cray in the bakery. She wore her hair tied back, kept her head down. But Lowell saw her smile once when a little boy handed her a coin for a sweet bun, and it stuck with him. He brought her coffee in the mornings. They sat on the porch and watched the sun rise over the red hills. She told him about her mother, who had died when she was 12. About how she used to ride bareback through the arroyos, hair flying wild. Lowell told her about his brother who never came back from the war. About how he had taken the badge because someone needed to keep this town from falling apart. One evening, near the end of the week, Delaney came to the jailhouse with a small paper bag. "I made gingerbread," she said, a little shy. I thought you might. Like some? Lowell took the bag from her, fingers brushing hers. Thank you, she hesitated. I feel like I can breathe again when I am near you, he stepped closer. You are safe with me, Delaney, always. Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. That night, after she left, Lowell sat in his office and stared at the ring in his desk drawer. It had belonged to his mother. He had not thought of giving it to anyone until now. The next morning, he walked into the bakery just as the sun broke over the rooftops. Delaney stood behind the counter in a soft blue dress, flour dusting her fingers. Lowell stepped up, heart beating hard. Marry me, he said, her breath caught. I know it is sudden, he said, but I do not care what anyone else thinks. I want to give you a home, a real one. A life where no one ever locks you away again. Delaney stared at him, hands trembling. I want you, he said simply. No one else. She stepped around the counter slowly, like she was walking through a dream, then she reached up and touched his cheek. Yes, Lowell let out a breath that shook. She smiled through her tears. Yes, I will marry you. They married under the cottonwoods behind the church on a warm October afternoon. Reverend Doyle's voice drifted low and sure over the gathered townsfolk, most of whom hung back along the fence line, watching like they weren't sure whether to trust what they were seeing. Mrs. Cray brought a small basket of yellow wildflowers. Lowell wore his cleanest shirt, sleeves rolled once at the wrist. Delaney came down the short aisle on her own 2 feet, her dress plain but pressed, her chin high. Afterward, they walked home together, hands brushing now and again, the silence between them full of something soft and steady. Lowell's house stood at the edge of town, near the edge of the dry wash. It was a single story with a small front porch and 2 rooms inside. He'd cleared a space for her things, moved his boots off the board at the foot of the bed, and fixed the sticking hinge on the back door. Delaney stepped across the threshold and let her fingers trail across the windowsill. It smells like cedar. I kept the stove hot this morning, he said. Figured it might help the place feel lived in. She turned toward him. It feels like a beginning. That night, she tucked her shawl around her shoulders and sat beside him while he polished the brass on his rifle. The only sound was the slow scrape of cloth over metal and the faint whistle of wind through the mesquite. I've never had a key to a house before, she said. Lowell set the rifle aside. You've got one now, her eyes drifted to the fire. I used to think I'd never be still again, that I'd always be running from someone. You're not running anymore, she nodded. I know, she began to rise, then paused. There's something I didn't say before, she waited until he looked at her. When I was locked in that barn, I didn't cry every night, just that last one. I think I was afraid I'd forget what kindness sounded like. He stood, slow and quiet, and crossed the room. You won't forget now. Delaney reached for his hand, fingers lacing through his. I remember everything since. That winter, the sky came down low and gray, and the nights were cold enough to crack the earth. Delaney planted onions in the back garden anyway, wrapping her hands in scraps of wool and kneeling in the frozen dirt. She mended shirts by the window and kept a small tin of dried lavender in the cupboard because it reminded her of the high desert beyond Las Cruces. Lowell came home with scuffed boots and wind-burned cheeks, but there was always warmth in his voice when he asked after her day. Once in late December, she met him on the porch with a kerosene lantern and a plate of warm bread. He took it in both hands, the steam rising up into the clear night air. You look tired, she said. He sat beside her on the step. There was a land dispute over near Dry Creek. Had to ride out and settle it before it turned to blood. She folded her hands in her lap. Did they listen? Eventually. One man's pride, the other's fence line, neither wanted to back down. She leaned her shoulder against his. You've got a way of making people hear what they need to, he glanced over at her. So do you, just quieter. The lantern light caught on her profile and something in him shifted. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She looked down at it. What's this? He unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a brush with polished wood and soft bristles. Figured you might want one of your own. Delaney ran her fingers over the carved handle. You remembered. You said you used to brush your hair out by the river. I thought maybe. She turned to him, eyes shining. It's perfect. That night, she sat at the edge of the bed and pulled the brush through her hair, slow and steady, while he watched from the doorway. When she finished, she set it on the shelf beside the lamp and looked over her shoulder. You make me feel like I matter, she said. Lowell crossed the room and knelt beside her. You do. She reached for him, and there, without a word more, they folded into each other like rain into soil, quiet, necessary, lasting. Spring came late that year, but when it did, the onions pushed up through the earth, green and stubborn. Delaney knelt beside them one morning, sleeves rolled and eyes narrowed against the sun. Lowell leaned on the porch rail, coffee in hand. They came up, they did. She stood and brushed off her skirt. Took their time, but they found light. He smiled just a little. Sounds familiar. Delaney crossed the yard and stopped in front of him. I don't flinch when I hear bootsteps behind me anymore. That's good. I sleep through the night. His voice was quiet. You deserve to. She reached for his hand. I never thought peace would look like this. Coffee before daylight, onions in the dirt, a man who waits for me to come home. He pulled her closer. It's yours now, all of it. She rested her forehead against his chest. You gave me more than safety, Lowell. You gave me a name I can speak without shame. He wrapped his arms around her. You gave me something too. What's that? A reason to come home. The sun rose higher, spilling gold over the edge of the roof. In the hush of morning, beneath the wide Arizona sky, they stood without moving, two people who had once been broken, now whole in the quiet space they'd built together. The land around Cora Flats turned green in April, a brief and stubborn kind of spring that came with sudden winds and pale blossoms clinging to the mesquite trees. Lowell spent more evenings on the porch now, boots kicked off, his shoulder brushing Delaney's as they sat side by side, watching the shadows stretch long across the wash. One evening, after supper, Delaney rolled out a length of muslin across the kitchen table, her brow furrowed. What's that for? Lowell leaned on the doorframe, arms crossed. She smoothed the fabric with both hands. Mrs. Cray's sister is having a child in June. I told her I'd help with the layette. You ever done that before? No, she said, glancing up. But I remember how my mother stitched seams by lamplight, always humming to herself. I figure I can hum too. Lowell walked over and picked up the small pair of shears beside the cloth. You've got a quiet way of filling up a room. Delaney didn't look up, but her voice was soft. I used to try not to take up space at all. He set the shears down and touched her back, just between the shoulder blades. You don't have to be small here. She turned slightly, her hand finding his. I know. By May, she spent most mornings at the schoolhouse, helping the teacher keep order among the younger children. The schoolmarm, Miss Beale, had taken a fall and broken her wrist, and Delaney offered to help without waiting to be asked. When Lowell stopped by to check the stove pipe one afternoon, he found her kneeling beside a boy with a scraped knee and two missing front teeth. Don't cry now, she said gently, tying a strip of cloth around the wound. You've got a hunter's heart. Just needs a little mending. Lowell waited until the boy was back with the others, then stepped closer. You're good with them. Delaney stood, brushing her hands on her apron. They remind me that not everything in the world is hard, just most things. He tilted his head. You ever think of having one of our own? She froze, then turned toward him slowly. You mean? I mean I wouldn't mind if this house felt a little louder someday. Delaney's eyes drifted to the window where a girl in braids was tracing letters in the dust on the sill. I never thought I'd be the one to raise a child. I didn't think anyone would want to raise one with me. I want all of it with you, he said. Whatever comes. That night she sat beside him in bed, her hand resting lightly over his. I would want them to have your steadiness. Your sense of right. Lowell turned toward her, his voice low. And I'd want them to have your grit, your heart. The days grew longer, the air thick with mesquite bloom and wood smoke. Delaney started tending a patch of squash behind the house, her hands dark with soil by midday. She hung her laundry with pins she carved herself from broken clothes poles. And once, she mended the hem of Lowell's shirt while he read aloud from an old tract left behind by the circuit preacher. In late June, a rider came from downriver with word of a mining crew gone missing near the ridge. Lowell packed a bedroll and left before dawn, promising to be back in 3 days. Delaney stood in the doorway as he mounted his horse. He looked down at her. "If anything comes up, I'll go to Craze," she said. "I remember what you taught me about the rifle." He gave a nod, then leaned down and pressed a kiss to her brow. "Keep the porch lantern lit." "I always do." He was gone 5 days. When he returned, sunburnt and dust-covered, he found her sitting on the front step, a basket of green beans beside her and a loose braid falling down her back. She stood when she saw him, her eyes wide, but she didn't run to him. She waited. He dismounted and stepped forward, stopping just in front of her. "I brought you something." She raised her eyebrows. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small polished stone, smooth and pale blue. "Found it near the creek. Thought it looked like something you'd keep on a windowsill." She took it in her palm, fingers closing around it. "I was scared you wouldn't come back." "I always will." Her voice was quiet. "I've never had someone keep returning to me before." He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You've got someone now." That night the wind rose, warm and dry, carrying the scent of dust and creosote. Delaney sat on the porch rail, the stone in her pocket, while Lowell cleaned his saddle gear by lantern light. "You ever think," she said, not looking at him, "about what it might have been like if we'd met under different circumstances?" He paused. "Sometimes." "I don't," she said. "Because I wouldn't change a single thing that brought me to you." He set the leather down and crossed to her. "Not even the hard parts." She looked up at him, eyes clear. "Especially not the hard parts. That's where I found my way." Lowell touched her face, thumb tracing the line of her cheek. "You're braver than most men I've known." "I'm only brave because I learned what it means to stay standing." He leaned down then and kissed her the way a man does when he knows he's found his place, not hurried, not unsure, but full of something deep and certain. The wind rustled the trees behind them, and in the quiet that followed, the house stood warm and lit from within, a place built not from luck, but from grit and grace and something stronger than both. Inside, the kettle began to whistle. Delaney didn't move. "Let it sing," she said. Lowell smiled. "We've got time." By July, the heat settled thick across the Arizona ground, the kind that pressed into bone and made the hills shimmer like they might lift off the earth altogether. Lowell rose earlier than usual now, before the sun was full over the ridge, and let Delaney sleep longer. Her breath even beneath the linen sheet they'd patched together from old feed sacks and scraps of her muslin. He returned one morning from patrolling the East Arroyo with a streak of dried blood across his sleeve and a split in his boot leather. Delaney was on the porch when he came up the steps, rubbing linseed oil into the rocking chair's arms with quick, careful strokes. She stood when she saw him. "That your blood?" He looked down like he hadn't noticed. Rattler spooked the horse, took a tumble near the bend, nothing deep. "You need to sit," she said, already turning toward the door, "and I'll boil water." Lowell caught her wrist gently. "Let it be. I rinsed it in the creek." "It's crusted over." Delaney's voice was soft but steady. "Crusted doesn't mean clean." He let her guide him inside. At the wash basin, she peeled back the torn sleeve, lips pressed tight as she worked. After a pause, she spoke. "I used to think if I ignored pain long enough, it'd go somewhere else." Lowell watched her hands. "Did it?" "No, it just sat quiet until it got worse." He reached out, brushing her waist with the back of his fingers. "You take care with me like you're mending something fragile." "I've had enough break in my hands," she said. "I don't want you added to it." Later that week, she walked to the edge of the wash alone, carrying the small tin box where she kept things too strange to part with a rusted button, a cracked piece of mirror, the dried husk of a Luna moth she'd found near the barn months before. When she came back, Lowell was fixing the porch step, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt. She stood beside him, quiet for a long while, then said, "I buried the box." He straightened and looked at her. Didn't think you would. I needed to keep it for a while, now I don't, he nodded. You want to mark the spot? No, she said. I want to let the desert take it. The following Sunday, they sat in the back pew of the church, Delaney's hands folded neatly in her lap. Lowell kept his hat over his knee, eyes on the preacher's boots instead of the pulpit. After the service, as the congregation filed out into the white heat of morning, Reverend Doyle stopped them at the door. Folks been talking, he said, voice low enough not to carry. Saying you two are building something steady. Delaney didn't look away. We are. Doyle nodded, then tipped his head. You ever want it blessed, you come find me. They walked home without speaking, dust rising behind their footsteps. At the gate, Lowell turned. You want that? The blessing? Delaney rested her hand on the latch. I want what we already have. But if it makes it easier for others to see it's real, I don't mind. Lowell leaned in and kissed her temple, his mouth lingering there. It's real to me. That night, thunder rolled in from the north, though no rain fell. Delaney stood at the window, watching the sky flicker, her arms crossed loosely over her chest. Lowell sat behind her, unlacing his boots in the yellow lamplight. After a while, he spoke. You ever miss where you came from? She didn't turn. No, I miss the idea of it, maybe. But not the truth of it. What the idea looked like, soft things, my mother's voice, a clean river, a place you could sleep without waking afraid. He waited. She turned and met his eyes. It looks more like this now, this house. You? Lowell stood, walked to her, and wrapped his arms around her waist from behind. She leaned into him, her head against his chest. Outside, the lightning cracked again, but it was far off, just heat playing at being storm. When I think about the future, she said, I don't see anything grand. Just your hands and this porch and maybe a child who knows what it means to be safe. You'll teach them that, he said. Better than I ever could, she nodded. We'll do it together. They stood there until the sky quieted, the lamp flickering low. In the hush between one breath and the next, nothing needed saying. Everything that mattered was already known. By late August, the light had softened. The sun still burned in the middle of the day, but mornings carried a hush that hinted at the coming shift of season. The squash vines behind the house had begun to yellow at the edges, and Delaney let them be, letting the earth decide what it would keep. Lowell came in one evening with his sleeves rolled to the elbow, and dust caked into the creases of his knuckles. He set his hat on the hook by the door and crossed to where Delaney sat darning one of her stockings with steady hands and a bit of twine-wrapped wool. I saw Lee Sutter's ranch wagon headed south, he said. Looks like they're pulling out for good. She didn't pause in her stitching. Didn't think they'd stay after the judge handed down the fine. He's lucky that's all he got. Delaney gave one small nod, then tied off the thread and set the stocking aside. Lowell watched her for a moment. You feel different now that he's gone. I don't think about him much anymore, she said. I used to carry the memory of that place like a stone under my ribs. Now it just feels far off. He stepped closer, his voice low. I was hoping it might. I think I needed to stay in one place long enough to let the fear wear thin. Lowell crouched beside her chair, resting his hand lightly on her knee. You've made this place more than just still. You've made it good. She looked at him for a long time before she spoke again. I want to start with the room across from ours. He blinked. You mean, I've been thinking of how to make it warm. A quilt first. Maybe something with yellows. Lowell stood and pulled her close, holding her like she was the only solid thing he'd ever put his hands on. You sure? She nodded against his chest. I'm sure. By mid-September, Delaney was rising earlier, her steps slower, her appetite shifting towards salted biscuits and the smell of cinnamon. Mrs. Cray had taken to sending over jars of preserves, always with a firm pat on the arm and a look that said she saw what others hadn't yet spoken aloud. One morning, as they shelled beans on the back stoop, Delaney turned toward Lowell and said, I had a dream last night. He looked up from his work. What about? We were standing in this same yard, but there were little feet running through the rows. And your shirt was soaked from carrying buckets back to the well, but you just kept smiling. Sounds like a good kind of dream. It was, but it made me think. I want them to know where they come from, not just us. I want them to know how far a person can travel and still find something whole. Lowell nodded, quiet. Then we'll tell them, all of it. She smiled, something calm and rooted settling in her expression. I think I'm ready to be someone's beginning. The cotton harvest passed without storm. The hills turned gold and the air grew crisp enough to keep the windows latched at night. Mrs. Beale returned to the schoolhouse with her wrist healed, and Delaney let the children go with a kiss to each of their foreheads, one by one, before walking home with a hand resting protectively just below her ribs. In November, Reverend Doyle stood with them beneath the cottonwoods again. This time there was no crowd, no folded hands or whispered prayers. Just a blessing spoken over quiet soil and a home marked not by ceremony but by choice. As winter settled, Delaney moved slower through the house, her hands often pressed to her back, her breath catching sometimes when she rose from the rocker. Lowell carved a cradle from juniper and set it beside their bed, the wood smooth and pale and smelling faintly of the hills. On a windy night in early February, their daughter was born. The midwife, called in from the edge of the next town, placed the small, squalling bundle in Delaney's arms just as the wind died down and left the night sharp and still. Lowell knelt beside the bed, his hand cradling the tiny foot that kicked against the blanket. "She's louder than I expected," he said softly. "She's never had reason to be quiet," Delaney whispered, eyes full of something he hadn't seen before, something wide and deeper than any canyon he'd ever crossed. She came into a world where no one's ever told her to be afraid. They named her Clara after Delaney's mother. No one in Cora Flats questioned it. They just started setting aside extra bread, offering more than one chair at the post office, and waving when they passed by the house with the rockers on the porch and the cradle in the window. Delaney spent mornings with Clara swaddled against her chest, singing low songs that came from no place in particular. Lowell built a second fence around the garden to keep out the jackrabbits, and on Sundays he carved little animals from leftover firewood, setting them one by one on the shelf above the hearth. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the walls in amber light, Delaney watched Lowell sway with Clara in his arms, her face tucked beneath his chin. "She'll never wonder if she's wanted," Delaney said. "She'll never have to," he replied. Delaney reached for his free hand, threading her fingers through his. "We aren't just mended pieces anymore, are we?" Lowell looked at her, his eyes steady and warm. "No, we're a whole thing now." Outside, the wind carried the scent of damp earth and juniper. The cradle creaked gently as Lowell set Clara down, her breath already even, her tiny fist curled beneath her cheek. Delaney leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "Do you think," she asked, "this is what peace feels like?" He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I know it is." And they sat like that, in the hush of evening, in a house that held no ghosts, only quiet joy and the soft promise of all that lay ahead.